Okay. So, like she said earlier, I'm going to cover a topic called high leverage practices. I'm not going into great detail on, there's 22 of them, so I won't be going over all 22, but none of this is new. If you have a degree in special education, you should have heard this at some point when you were in school. Um, but this is just kind of bringing it back to the forefront. So we have to review this with our teachers that are learning to teach and our master's teachers, just to remind them kind of what practices we should be using in our classrooms to get the biggest bang for our buck. So today I'm just going to kind of overview what high leverage practices are. Some of you might actually know all of these. Once I get into them, you just didn't know that's what they're called. Where you can find more information about these, because today really is just a broad overview. And then hopefully at the end, we will have some time for questions and answers. I do believe the chat is being monitored. So if you have questions during, please feel free to go ahead and just chat them, and either they will answer you or they will save them for later for me to answer at the end. So the high leverage practices are on the screen. They might be a little hard to see depending on what kind of computer you're on, but basically the collaboration for effective educator development, accountability, and reform. So it's known as CEDAR. You might have heard of that. And the Council for Exceptional Children worked together to develop and publish a list of what they call high leverage practices. And these are designed for special education teachers, and we teach all of these to our teacher candidates. So these are the teaching strategies that have a lot of evidence to indicate that they will lead to improved student learning and behavior outcomes. So the reason that we really endorse them is that we have evidence to say, if you use these, there's a likelihood that your students will learn or that their behaviors will change. And they're organized around 4 aspects of practice. So there's collaboration, assessment is in the purple, social emotional behavior happens kind of across them, and then instruction. So today I am going to focus on these 7 high leverage practices, and these are the ones for instruction. So these are the ones that target the learning strategies. As a special education teacher, our instruction, or not even just teacher. So if you're a behavior specialist, if you're an occupational therapist, if you're a gen ed teacher with special ed students in your classroom, all the people who are working towards teaching children with disabilities should really focus their instruction on learning goals, being explicit, but also flexible. So they need to know what you're asking them to do, but you also have to have some flexibility because their learning and responses aren't always going to be the same. We also want to use various learning tools such as technology. And just remembering that when instruction is well designed, strategic, and adaptable, the people working with the children with disabilities have the skills to improve student learning. And that is our ultimate goal. So this is, again, just the list of high leverage practices that focus specifically on learning. So I'm going to go over each one and provide a couple of examples. So what I want you to keep in mind is that some of the strategies overlap among the high leverage practices. So for example, video modeling could fall under high leverage practice 13, 18, or 19. I'm going to preview each one and provide some examples. I won't have video modeling under each one. I'm actually not talking about video modeling today at all. But if I give an example and you think it would be better under a different category, it's completely fine. At the end of the day, we just want to be considering how we can most effectively and efficiently teach our students. So you'll hear some examples for under adapting curriculum. We use technology to do that, but you'll also see high leverage practice 19 is using assistive instructional technology. So there is some overlap, and I think it's probably on purpose. So I'm going to get into each one of these. So for high leverage practice 13, this is adapting curriculum tasks and materials for specific learning goals. So this is where I'm going to say just teachers because I teach teachers most often, but it applies to all of you. So this is where teachers should adapt the curriculum materials and the task that they're assigning to their students so that students can meet their instructional goals. So those IEP goals, it could be academic related, maybe not even tied to their IEP. It can include selecting materials and tasks based on student needs, using relevant technology, making modifications. Making modifications happens a lot in our world. So those can include things like highlighting relevant information or even changing the task direction, decreasing the amount of material. So we kind of just start on this one with we determine what the essential curriculum elements are. So what does a student have to learn? And then we create a meaningful task so the student can learn that thing. Um, it could include focusing just on the relevant information, like maybe we get rid of information that's extra and not necessarily needed, changing the task, adjusting the amount of context, adjusting the depth of context. We can also make content enhancements, so things like visual supports. So this is an example of an adapted text. So we do a lot of story-based lessons, and then we assess our students using pictures, so those visual supports, so that the mental load is not quite as heavy. Um, Also using mnemonics. So I was searching for a visual for this, and I happened upon this, and apparently we're changing our order of operations mnemonics. So they found that this has worked better for students recently. Um, a lot of our students in special education do very well with mnemonics once they've learned them. They can even learn to like write them at the top of their paper to refer back to as they're, working through, for in this example, be math problems. Graphic organizers are also an evidence-based practice for kids in special education. I would also argue that our children not in special education could really benefit from these. This one's fancy, but they don't have to be fancy. There's some that look just like a Venn diagram, and those are also, they work well for a lot of our students. And then some curriculum actually comes with these adaptations already made for you. This is an example of one of the medical titles in the Education Associates Project Discovery Career Exploration Kits. And so there are lots of things I'm going to show you today that you have to create, but there are things that exist that already include these things. So this is just an example of how there are curriculums that do exist that are already adapted for our students. And then moving on to high leverage practice 15, this is providing scaffolding supports. And this is just a visual. See if I can get these words off of here. This is a visual that includes a lot of information, but scaffolded supports are designed to provide temporary assistance. So when we think about using these with our students, ideally, we won't have to use them forever, but we're using them temporarily so that students can successfully complete tasks that they can't yet do independently. What we're trying to do here is provide some support. Sometimes it's people support. Sometimes it's not people support. So you might be able to put a visual somewhere in the room that provides some support. You might be able to provide um, like part of the answer and they're just filling in the rest of the answer. Uh, it's all kinds of different supports that we provide. So it doesn't just have to be people support. And ideally, the less people support we provide, the better. It's hard to fade people support. It could be visual, verbal, written. You want to make sure when you're scaffolding that you're only providing the amount of support someone needs. So we don't want to over support, but we do kind of over support when a student's first learning something difficult. And so then the idea is we give a lot of support and then we start to gradually remove that support once we see that that level of support is just no longer needed. Some supports are planned prior to lessons. So when you're developing lesson plans, including some scaffolding in those lesson plans is a really great idea. Some are provided responsively during instruction. So we use moment by moment interactions with our students and how they're performing on the task that we've assigned them to do. And we might have to jump in and actually scaffold a little bit more. Or we see that they're starting something independently and we had decided to scaffold, but we actually don't need to. So you can make those decisions in the moment. Response prompting is an example of scaffolding. Those are things like graduated guidance where we provide in the moment kind of physical guidance. So you guide a student's arm toward their visual schedule because they need to check their schedule, or you provide a little bit of assistance for handwriting. So you're providing just in the moment the amount of physical assistance a student might need. The system Elise prompts or most Elise prompting is also a response prompting strategy. Time delay, and then simultaneous prompting is one that you may or may not have heard of. It's a very similar to time delay in the way that you apply it. It's usually reserved for our students who need the most support. Other examples might include hints. So you ask a student a question and they don't have the answer, but you don't need to give them a full prompt, like the prompt that's going to give them the answer. You might be able to give a hint. Anchor charts around your classroom. You might have cue cards that you can embed into your instruction. So this is just providing support that eventually you're hoping to fade so that the student does not need that level of support, forever, just while they're learning. And then high leverage practice 16 is using explicit instruction. So for those of you who have a degree in special education, especially if you're focused on like children with learning disabilities, I would say this should have been a whole semester class for you on how to use explicit instruction. If it wasn't, I would definitely do some research on it. This has a lot of evidence to support it. So explicit instruction is just a set of teacher behaviors that we have repeatedly shown through research to have positive impacts on student achievement, especially for those students who are struggling to learn. So this is actually something that I think all teachers do. Children with disabilities just needed a little bit more systematic. So this is where a teacher explicitly shows or tells a student what to do, or even how to think through a problem as they solve it. You can show or tell students how to enact strategies, how to complete tasks, how to classify concepts. So you're modeling it, you're showing them exactly what to do. Then you gradually release it to where you do it together. Then you give them time to do it on their own with feedback, and then they get time to really do it on their own. So this is something called, you might have heard it called model, lead, test. So I'm going to model it. I'm going to lead you through it, but I'm going to test to see if you can do it. Other people call it the I do, we do, you do. So I'm going to do it. We're going to do it together. Now I'm going to watch you do it. We teach a lot of skills using this strategy. We want to definitely use it if a student is learning new material, or if they're maybe not learning it for the first time, but it's something really complex. So there's lots of steps to it, really talking the student through the different steps. And you might spend a lot of time on the we do it, or the you do it while I watch. It may take a really long time to get to the you do it alone if something that they're learning is really complex. When you're using this strategy, you want to strategically choose examples and non-examples so that a student understands, like they don't just see a correct model every time. So you could do an incorrect, let's say you're solving an algebraic equation. You could do it incorrectly and then talk yourself through how you knew it was wrong, or how do you self-check to see if it's right, so that the student doesn't only see the correct way to do it, because they're not always going to do it correct, but then they can see problem solving strategies about, I'm trying to do it this way, it's not really working. The teacher's talking through like, oh, wait, I made a mistake. I didn't carry the one, whatever it is. And then they can see the teacher talk through their problems. Making sure that you're using the language that the student understands, but also the language in the curriculum if they're going to be tested on it later. Trying to anticipate common misconceptions. I think this gets better with time. As you teach more students, you learn kind of what the misconceptions are. But if you can anticipate those, you can embed more of those salient examples and non-examples. Making sure you're highlighting the essential content. So we don't want to spend too much time modeling pieces that don't necessarily, it all matters, but sometimes when we pick what we have to teach, what the student has to learn to master their goal, their objective, a standard, there's sometimes some extra stuff that gets added into what we're teaching, and it's not necessarily wrong to do that. It's actually, we'll talk about adding instructional information in a minute, but we don't want to get stuck in the weeds. We really want to focus our efforts on, when we're doing explicit instruction, on the important pieces that we're wanting our students to learn. So sometimes with that, we might need to remove distracting information when we're first teaching it. And then we might need to add that distracting information back in if a student's going to be expected to, let's say we're doing algebraic equate or doing word problems. And so at the beginning of teaching them how to solve a word problem, we might need to remove the information that's not relevant to the question. But we might have to actually put it back in and teach them how to ignore that once they've learned how to solve the problems. If they're going to be tested, like on a state test or something, that might include distracting information or irrelevant information. Explicit instruction can also include stimulus and response prompting. So a while ago, we were talking about the response prompting of like graduated guidance, time delay. Those things can be used in explicit instruction. What we really want to think about when we're using this is that when we do an instructional trial, we want to make sure that on the you do it and I watch, that we are giving the student the opportunity to, we give them, like, we have their attention, we ask them to do the thing we're asking them to do, and then their behavior or their response to that, there is a consequence. So it's either behavior specific praise, they know they got it right, or there's some kind of prompt that comes in because they didn't do it right. During that you do it where I watch and guide you, we don't want them over practicing it incorrect. We want them practicing it and getting feedback almost immediately so that they learn what is the correct response and what is the not correct response. There's a whole semester on just this one slide, so I could talk about it forever. So I'm going to move on so we can get to the other ones. All right, so high leverage practice 17 is using flexible grouping. And I do think that most teachers try this, and I think they do it in different, it looks different in different rooms, which this would make sense. It depends on how many students you have, what types of students you have. Some of you may not even have a group of students. You might just be working one-on-one if you're in there, doing therapy with them. But these are things, if you're not the teacher, that you might be able to help the teacher facilitate. So just keep that in mind. So the more adults that are in the room, sometimes the easier flexible grouping becomes. But this is where teachers assign students to either groups that are similar to we have people who are learning at about a similar level in one group, or there might be groups that are made up of all different kinds of learners. And this will be based on the learning goals and the student characteristics. So you really got to get to know your students to know who can be in a group together, but also what is the goal of this specific group? So is it that we're all going to sit down and learn the same thing? Then they need to be about at the same level. Is it, I'm hoping that we have you can do these groups where you have one student who is kind of going to be used as the model. We have one student who might be struggling to learn the content, and then we have two students who are doing okay. And those four students work together to figure out some problem. They're usually engaged in some kind of group task direction where they have to solve a problem together, or they're doing, some kind of group work. And when you have groups that are heterogeneous, so everybody in the group is a little bit different, we can assign group roles. And so each student might have a different learning outcome as a result of being in that group. The hardest part, I think, for teachers during grouping is you have to monitor peer interactions, and you're having to provide feedback on student learning all at the same time. So it can be a little bit challenging, but I think if you are intentional with how you group the students, your focus can be on one or two groups, while maybe another one or two groups can be doing something that's more independent that may not require as much direct teacher feedback. Um, you can use flexible learning groups to accommodate learning differences, to promote in-depth academic related interactions. It teaches students to work together. This is a really important thing when they're coming to college. Some of our college students are having to learn to work together. It seems like for the first time. This is a really important skill for kindergarten through 12th grade for kids to learn to work together and not always working with people who learn like them. So when you're creating these groups, you have to kind of figure out if you want everybody doing the same task with the same stimuli, so like the same materials for everybody that's in the group. That's one way to group. It could be the same task with different stimuli or different materials. So you might have a math, well, I don't know why I'm stuck on math because I don't teach math, but a math lesson where some kids need manipulatives and some kids don't, or some kids need a calculator and some kids don't, but they're all working on the same task. They just have different materials to get them to the end result. You can have a different task with the same materials. So I have a lot of materials in front of us, but this group is going to do one thing with the task and this group is going to do something different, or within this group you're going to do this with the materials and you're going to do this with the materials. You can also have a different task and different materials for everybody in the group. I think that for me is probably the hardest group to manage, but it definitely can be done. Your student responses can be individual within the group or it can be a group response. So it really just depends. And so what I want you to take away from this is if you are in a situation where you're going to run a group, you're like, if you are the classroom teacher or you're a therapist that's in the room helping during group time, or you're an administrator who can help teach your teachers how to do this, whatever your role is, thinking intentionally about how many groups are actually going to be feasible at this point in time, who in this room can work alone, and what task can they do alone. So that's going to be a group. Like you have 2 or 3 people off to the side doing their own thing, and they're not going to need a lot of help. And then I have a group that might need a little help, and then I might have a group that needs a lot of help. And so making sure that if it's just one teacher, they can be between the 2 groups. It could also be that groups have to kind of rotate through the teacher station where the teacher can provide a lot of help. So whatever's happening in the other stations, rotations, groups can't need as much teacher help. So when you're doing flexible grouping, one teacher cannot be providing all the feedback to all the groups at all the time. So that's why this is called flexible grouping. It means that we have different groups of people doing different things. So it takes a little bit of planning, but there is a lot of evidence that peers can learn from each other, that students can start to learn to do things independently. So we don't want our entire school day being where the teacher is directly giving feedback all day long. Our jobs aren't like that. So we want them to become independent adults. So this has to start like in elementary school, where we ask them to do something and then we walk away. It doesn't mean that we're not going to go back and provide support. And some of this has to be explicitly taught. So they have to be ready to be in a group where they're doing independent work. But that gives the teacher more time and flexibility to work with a small group of students, providing more intense support. If we have some students who can work as a group without the teacher, or students who can work independently without the teacher. And then high leverage practice 18 is using strategies to promote active student engagement. I think that this one is actually very obvious, but I don't actually think we're really good about always incorporating it. But I will tell you this. So as a college instructor, my classes are 2.5 hours at night. And my students will just like blankly stare at me if I don't get them active. So the more active I get my college students, the better the 2.5 hours feels for everyone. I would argue that's the same for any of our classrooms. Even in, I think kindergarten, we're pretty good about engagement, but like once you get to second or third grade and you're getting textbooks, it's easy to fall into like the same kind of activities every day. We also tend to engage our students in engaging activities that we personally like. So I have found for myself that when I get bold and I come up with something new, that my students are more engaged and I am having a better time teaching. I can see learning happening. Um, this is just where teachers use a variety of instructional strategies that result in active student responding. So the ones you might see the most in research would be choral responding. I couldn't use this as a teacher. I taught children with severe disabilities. So I could have like one or two that would yell out the answer if I let them, but then I wouldn't know what the other ones knew. So I didn't use choral responding, but it's really effective in gen ed settings or like larger resource room settings. But response cards are evidence-based, and they could take on a million different forms. It can be, just a color card. It could be an answer choice. There's 1,000 ways where a student holds up something or touches something on their iPad that indicates their response. You can see this where like you write on a whiteboard and hold the whiteboard up. It's whatever it takes so that you know that the student has responded. It can take on lots of different forms, but really just getting your students involved in hands-on activities. So if you can watch them engage with the materials, if you can watch them engage with their peers, you can start to monitor how engaged they are and do they seem to be learning at that moment. It might not, you'll have an assessment later. That's a different high leverage practice. So you'll assess your engagement strategies later. But if students are talking to other students and they are on task and they're on topic is probably a big one. If you've assigned like a project and they're actively manipulating the materials to create something, you can kind of watch to see in the moment, do they seem to be learning the material? Do they seem to be responding the way that I think that they should or would? Are they leaning on their peers for help? Are they sitting and doing nothing, waiting to be prompted? Those are all things that will tell you if a student is connecting with the material. The more engaging our activities, the more likely our students are to attempt to do it. So these are just some random engagement strategies on this slide. I would say that this one might be one of the most critical high leverage practices to promote academic success. Just because if our students are actively engaged, then they're actively working, they're active with the materials, they're active with the learning outcomes that we've, decided we're working on for this lesson. And then when they're not active, you can see it. And so because you can see it, you can work to either create different engagement strategies. You can foster engagement perhaps by prompting a little bit. You might pair two peers together to see if they work well together. One might motivate the other. You can also promote engagement if you can find ways to connect learning to their lives. So knowing their academic backgrounds, their cultural backgrounds can make a huge difference. You can use some teacher-led, peer-assisted, student-regulated, technology-supported strategies. There's just 1,000 ways to get our students engaged in today's classrooms. And then while a student is actively engaged, you want to provide positive and constructive feedback to sustain their performance. High leverage practice 19 is use assistive instructional technologies. So again, we have an entire semester-long class on assistive technology in our program, so I will not spend too much time on this, but assistive technology is any technology that we can provide to students to help them access the curriculum or an area of their life. So daily living, time management, vocational skills, whatever part of their life they need to access. It can be anything as simple as like a pencil grip on lined paper, and the lines might be darker, to a very high-tech speech generating device. So assistive technology does not mean it's like an iPad. That can be assistive technology, but that's not what that means. So it's anything that we can provide to another person to help them access their environment. In a school, it's most often to access the curriculum. Instructional technology is the technology we use to help students engage with their curriculum. It can be things like, it can be like this PowerPoint presentation is instructional technology. I could turn it into a Prezi and make it more animated. We can teach students to use the technology in the classroom to learn content. We can use virtual reality to practice something. We can use video modeling as an instructional technology. So these are just, as technology evolves in our world, we are going to have to keep up with it. It is a very engaging way for our students to learn. I'm not an advocate for like using high-tech things all day long in a classroom, but there are some very highly motivating technologies that we can use with our students to help engage them in learning if student engagement seems to be an issue. And then high leverage practice 22 is providing positive and constructive feedback to guide students' learning and behavior. And so I will tell you that when I work with pre-service teachers, so those people learning to teach, when I go observe them in the classroom, 99% of them, I shouldn't say it's everyone, 99% of them get feedback from me that you have to learn to say something besides good job. So teachers fall into the good job hole. Good job does not mean anything to most of our learners because they don't really know what that means. Like, was it a good job that I'm sitting down? Is it a good job that I didn't hit my friend? Is it a good job that I just read that paragraph? So we want to use feedback to guide student learning and behavior. We should be using it to increase motivation, engagement, and independence. And that should lead to student learning and increases in positive behavior. Effective feedback should be strategically delivered and goal-directed. So it's most effective if the learner has a goal and the feedback tells the learner how they're doing. So am I doing it right? Am I doing it wrong? Do I need to do something different? It can be verbal, nonverbal, or written, and should be timely, genuine, meaningful, age-appropriate, and specific. So this is what I tell my students. It's really hard to get out of the good job hole. Like, that's just what we do. So it's okay to say good job if you pair it with something specific. So you can say, good job reading that paragraph. And then as you start doing that, the good job doesn't feel so good. So then you say things like, I really like how you read that paragraph, or you did so good reading this part. Let me help you reread this part to let them know, like, I did part of it well, but this part I still need help on. So we want to do what's called, we want to provide behavior specific praise. So tell them that they did a good job, but tell them exactly what they did a good job doing. And then if you really are struggling with getting out of the good job habit, you can Google 99 ways to say good job. And there are 99 ways that you can say it without using the words good job. I will also tell you that when you use good job over and over, it starts to not sound as genuine. And I can only tell you that I've watched millions of lessons being taught by different people in different stages of their career. And the people who do the good job over and over, by the end of the lesson, it's like they probably think they're being a cheerleader, but it's really coming across like good job. And so it's just not believable. Like, the student doesn't even believe that you think it's a good job. When we're providing feedback to help students learn, we can also provide some non-target or extra information. So I said I would come back to that on an earlier slide. You can tell one evidence-based strategy is, so let's say you're working with a student who's identifying I'm going to say objects, and this is a pen. Okay. So we're like, what is it? And the student says it's a pen. And you'd be like, that's right. It is a pen. You can write letters with a pen. So you're just providing extra information. The student doesn't have to do anything with it. But we've done some research to show the students can learn that extra information. And so it doesn't take any more time from you. You're just adding a little bit of an extra statement to the end of their constructive feedback. So I promised to tell you where you could find out more about high leverage practices. And I promise you this was a brief overview. So there are lectures that we provide for 2.5 hours on each of these. There are whole classes on some of these that last for 16 weeks. So I know it was an overview, but the Council for Exceptional Children has all of these high leverage practices. You can buy these books, but I will tell you, you can also download the PDFs that provide a lot of this information. They also have resources. So let's say you didn't know what time delay was and you wanted to learn more. I think that there's resources embedded in there so it will take you to a place where you can learn more about specifically time delay. The Iris Center has an entire module on high leverage practices. It is more interactive. The Council for Exceptional Children is a resource to find PDFs. The Iris Center is like a module to help you walk through these. It's all 22 high leverage practices. So if you're interested in learning a little bit more, those resources are there. I will say that CEC also does, these high leverage practices are for all kids with special, that are in special education, but they've written some books on like high leverage practices and students with extensive support needs. If they're the same 22 high leverage practices, but framed within what does that look like in a classroom for children with more severe disabilities? And now I believe we can open it up for some questions.
Sorry, I was trying to grab my computer is going backwards on itself. I was trying to grab the video back on and it wouldn't do it for me. Wow, fascinating. We had a lot of discussion going on in the background about some of these things here, because some of them are just so, gosh, you're doing them all the time, and then you don't really catch yourself. I love the 99 ways to say good job.
Yeah, I was just
So, yeah.
I
So,
will say that one of the most powerful teaching strategies in the world is to videotape yourself teaching. You watch it in the privacy of your own home, you will be shocked at what you do or what you think. You think you're doing it one way, but then you watch yourself and you're like, I do say good job a lot. And I also am not the cheerleader I think I am. Like, I think I am like, dancing on the table. Woohoo, you did it. And it's not coming across as genuine in the video.
right. And being able to take that opportunity to kind of rephrase and make that connection again so that they actually understand where it goes to. Sure. Elisa, did you grab some questions from the chat? I know I saw a couple, but I'll let you go ahead as well.
I just said a couple. So if this was still a relatively new thing for me to try to understand, where do I start? What's the first thing that you would suggest, or the first resource I should go to be able to get my foot in this?
I think if I was really, really new to it, I would go to you can Google high leverage practice Iris module. It will take you right to it. The Iris modules are out of Vanderbilt and they're free. And it walks you through it in more of like a way to learn more about them. Whereas CEC it's information. There's you can download a PDF and read about it. I think the module is probably a little bit more interactive. It would just be more engaging. It would be, you would be monitoring your own learning of it. There's some reading, but there's probably also some videos. The specific strategies. So like, let's say, I don't know if you guys can hear us, but class just let out right outside my office. There are these autism internet modules. It's called AIM. You can also do those for free. And they have more of like, if you wanted to learn about time delay specifically, there's a module about time delay. And there's like a pre-test and a post-test, but they're free. Nobody cares what you make on the test. They have experts in the field who created them, and they are interactive. There's videos, there's vignettes, it's not just reading a PDF. So I think I would start with that.
Start with that. And what about if I'm trying to get this across? Because I think this is good for gen ed, not just for, because as a gen ed teacher, I often caught myself saying good job, and in my head going, what are you saying? I knew then, that good job. So I tried to do other things like, hey, that's awesome, or nice work, and tried to be. So how would I get this across to my gen ed teachers to get them to also incorporate that in their learning?
So more than just a good job.
Yeah, more than just a good job.
So I'm going to tell you that for me to make decisions on my students' learning, I collect data and I use data to drive all the decisions I make.
Mm.
And it might not be popular, but everybody on this call should be collecting data. I know that it's time consuming, but really, if you're not collecting data, then you're guessing at what your students can and can't do. And so I usually use data to help my gen ed teachers see that, like, when we're using these strategies, there's more progress. Or like if I were to pick one and start, I would come up with some creative student engagement activities that they haven't been exposed to yet and let the gen ed teachers see, like, look at this, look what we can do to get these kids involved, to get them actively wanting to learn. And then start using that flexible grouping so that the gen ed teacher can spend time. Because even in gen ed, I mean, there are kids that should be in special ed, they just haven't made it there yet.
You bet.
There will
Mhm.
always be what I call the gray area children who will never qualify for special ed, but really cannot master gen ed content without support.
Right.
Those gen ed teachers need those skills. So all of these strategies will work for those kids. But I think if you can get some highly motivating, engaging activities and you start working on some flexible grouping, it's hard to teach 25 students at one time, but if you could focus on 5 while the other 20 had something else to do, it's powerful. So I think a gen ed teacher, we always feel like if you can get them to see one little ounce of growth, when they buy into the strategy, they buy into one, then they'll buy into all of it. It's like, oh, if that worked, these other things must work too.
Right, right, exactly.
Our gen ed teachers want to do it, right?
Yeah.
But like managing 25 students
Is really
it's a
tough.
challenge for anybody.
Sure.
It's challenging for me. I only taught like 6 to 12 students at a time, and that was a lot. So
Yeah, for
I
sure.
think it's really just helping them maybe rethink. So also, I will also say that sometimes we as adults perceive things as highly engaging and fun, and if our students aren't having fun with it, though, we have to rethink. What does a 5th grader find engaging and fun? It might not be what the adults think is engaging and fun.
True.
Exactly.
Very true.
And so that kind of leads to a question that we got from one of the participants who said, how do you motivate a student who doesn't want to be in school? So it really is what you're saying. You've got to find what motivates that student. And it may not be what you think would be motivating, but right. I mean,
So there's a lot. I just had this conversation at lunch about, I'm working with a teacher who has a student who wants to sleep. And we're like, like they were allowed to sleep last year with a different teacher. And I'm like, this is a not negotiable. Like, we have to break the habit. So we have to find something that is more motivating for that student than sleep. And that is not going to be easy. So although this is hard for a lot of teachers, but sometimes we have to abandon instruction to get a student to learn. And it's like really hard to understand. Like right now, the student's not doing anything.
Right.
You're teaching math, they are doing nothing. So maybe we need to abandon math for a day or two. And we need to be confident in it. When our administrator walks in, we need to say, I have a plan. Like sometimes we have to help them want to be there, because if you don't want to be there, you can't learn. If you're engaging in really challenging behavior, you're not learning. So it's not like, well, yesterday I taught math and he learned nothing, but today you're just not going to teach math and we're going to try to teach something. And that something is engaging with the materials in this classroom, talking to me, telling me what they want to do. Can they talk? If a student can tell you they don't want to be at school, a student can tell you what they do want to do. And so can we make something about what we can't play Fortnite at school, but is there something, what is it about Fortnite? Is there something we could do at school? Like maybe our math takes on a Fortnite look and we start graphing things that look like a little village. I don't know a lot about Fortnite, but my dog, you can make it, it's not going to be Fortnite, but it could be something similar to Fortnite.
Yeah.
Fortnite-esque. What is it about Fortnite you like? And it can't be playing with your friends, or maybe it is. You have a friend in the class. It's like really just talking. If the student can tell you, just ask them. If they can't tell you, that's when we have to do things called preference assessments, where we're bringing things to the student to see, like, do you like this or this? Do you want this or this? Do you want to write with this or this? And we write down every choice they make so we can start to get an idea of what they do like. But it is very hard for a teacher to abandon teaching for a day or two to get a student to buy in. Like, I really want to be here. I like you. I feel safe here.
Right.
They weren't learning yesterday. So 2 more days of not learning math is not gonna hurt
Right,
anybody. We can actually
right.
get them motivated to want to be here.
Right, right.
I think that a lot of the things that we've built into like the hands-on part of like project discovery,
Mhm.
you need math to measure
Mhm.
how much milk you're going to put into a recipe, or to figure out how much soil you're going to put into a pot. So if they want to do the hands-on part of things, y'all need to use some math. So like kind of show them where it fits in, because
Yep.
it's really integrated well within some of those project-based learning, hands
Mhm.
types of examples and things.
Mhm.
Well, and I would say, I'm gonna date myself, but I used to teach a functional curriculum. I didn't have to teach the core content. Like that was not, I didn't have to teach academic standards a really long time ago. But I think even with a shift towards teaching academics, if we can help our students understand why they're learning what they're learning, they're
Mhm.
going to be more motivated to learn it.
Yeah, for
Like
sure.
when you're solving the Pythagorean theorem, I mean, maybe you talk to them about how, like, if you wanted to plant a garden that wasn't a triangle and you had to buy wood, like you just put it into a real life scenario so that they can understand this is not just something I'm doing on this piece of paper and I'll
Oh,
never ever see it again. We do
right,
see it
right.
again. We just don't
Yeah,
call it that.
yeah, right, right, right. Yeah.
Or like if you're doing a unit of measurement, actually have them measure something, but the measurements need to be meaningful. So like you're measuring
Mhm.
things for trail mix, or you're measuring
Mhm.
things for an art project, or you're measuring something for a science. It's going to be a science experiment, but it requires the measurement too.
Mhm.
Exactly. So that it's not, so they can really answer that question. When am I ever going to use this? Well, here's where you're going to really use it.
Yeah, yeah,
Get ahead of that. I think we could stay here all day and talk about all of these things.
for
It's really
sure.
just nonstop, but I know everybody's got to get back to their classrooms and everything. So Dr. Spriggs, I just want to thank you so much for once again, just blessing us with all of your knowledge and practical
Mhm.
examples. We really, really appreciate it. And folks, we've answered a couple of times that, yep, you will be getting the recording to this, and you'll get a PDF of the slides. You can always go on up to educationassociates.com and you can get additional materials in here. We've got preview packets. We've got a newsletter. It's at the bottom of every page, and it does do a nice job of recapping the big bullet points from these sessions. So people like to subscribe to that and then send it out to their team, their staff members and so forth. But please just reach out. We're happy to give you a personal tour, answer any questions that you might have. And don't forget, you can always go to our resource room page. And there's the Webinar Wednesdays recording right there. You can be able to go back and thumb through them all and see what we've got. So you'll be able to share it with other folks. And if you need to, there's also information that will go through various different types of funding that's available. So we're here to help any way we can. Thank you for sharing part of your day with us and spending part of your day with us. And Dr. Spriggs and Felisa, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to be here with you guys. So.
Yes, enjoyed. Could talk to Dr. Spriggs all day about this stuff.
Go and
I am
enjoy.
also very open to emails if someone has a question that didn't get answered, or if you just sleep on it and you have a question, just tell me that you're from this, so it's not like out of left field. But I'm happy to always receive emails from people.
Yeah.
That's a good point. Hey, I saw this on the Education Associates Webinar Wednesday. Can you answer this?
Yeah.
Fantastic. And I'm going to echo Amber in the chat saying mahalo to everybody. I love that, Amber. Thank you very much. Have a
Thank
great
you.
rest of your day. Enjoy some abundant sunshine, I hope, and the fall. See y'all next month. All right. Yeah. Sometimes just a challenge to get to the stop recording.